All right, let's jump straight into it. Today on The Explainer, we are tracking one of the most unbelievable character arcs in all of human history. We're talking about a guy who started out as a literal bloodthirsty warlord, but somehow transformed into a visionary philosopher king. This is the story of Emperor Ashoka and how he totally redeemed a massive ancient Indian empire. To understand how wild this is, just listen to this quote. "Now beloved of the gods feels deep remorse for having conquered the Kalingans." This is an actual message Ashoka had carved into solid rock over 2 millennia ago. I mean, think about it. In the ancient world, victorious emperors simply didn't apologize. They bragged. They talked about the cities they burned to the ground. But here is a supreme ruler publicly expressing this agonizing, profound regret for his own victory. So why did he break the mold? Let's go back to the beginning. Setting the stage, let's look at the Mauryan Empire's rise. To give you some context, the stakes here were astronomical. This wasn't some tiny regional kingdom. It was a rising superpower. Ashoka was born into a legacy of relentless expansion. His grandfather, Chandragupta Maurya, literally founded the empire in 322 BCE, pushing back the leftover forces of Alexander the Great. Then his dad, Bindusara, pushed the borders way down south into the Deccan Plateau. So by the time Ashoka takes the throne around 273 BCE, we're talking about an empire that covers almost the entire Indian subcontinent. But here's the catch. Ashoka's path to power was definitely not guaranteed. He was born in 304 BC, and his mother, Dharma, was actually a commoner. In a highly competitive royal court packed with half-brothers born to high-status queens, Ashoka was treated like a total outsider. That dynamic bred an incredibly toxic, paranoid environment that really defined his younger years. Which brings us to his early reputation as Ashoka the Fierce Prince. Because he was the underdog, Ashoka felt he had to prove himself, and he did it with a terrifying level of ambition. History paints a picture of a hardened, really cruel young man who was obsessed with hunting. There's even a legend that he killed a lion using nothing but a wooden stick. He was an incredibly competent military commander, too. He completely crushed a rebellion in Taxila, and honestly, his older half-brothers were terrified of him. They were so scared, in fact, that they convinced their dad to send Ashoka into exile in a neighboring state called Kalinga. And it turns out their fears were 100% justified. When their father died, a massive succession war broke out. Now, Buddhist texts claim Ashoka literally slaughtered 99 of his own brothers to take the throne. Even if that exact number is a bit of a historical exaggeration to make his later transformation look even crazier, the main takeaway is clear. The guy who just took control of India's greatest empire was famous for his absolute, unyielding brutality. Fast forward a bit, and we hit the absolute turning point, the bloodshed of Kalinga. After securing his crown, Ashoka turns his attention back to Kalinga, the very place he was once exiled. In 261 BCE, he launches a massive invasion. Why Kalinga? Well, it was this independent, incredibly prosperous state on the east coast. It was highly strategic, packing a skilled navy that controlled vital trade routes in the Bay of Bengal. Plus, it was known as a peaceful place with a really beautiful blended culture. But to an ambitious guy like Ashoka, an independent Kalinga was a prize he just had to take. The Kalingans fought back hard against the Mauryan war machine, but they were ultimately crushed. And the human cost? It was apocalyptic. 100,000 soldiers and civilians were slaughtered right there on the battlefield. And if that wasn't horrifying enough, another 150,000 men, women, and children were forcibly ripped from their homes and deported. It essentially wiped the entire fabric of Kalingan society off the map. So Ashoka won. The subcontinent was practically all his. But as he walked through the blood-soaked ruins of Kalinga, listening to the survivors, something inside him just shattered. You really have to ask, what actually happens when a conqueror is crushed by the weight of his own victory? For Ashoka, the sheer skill of the horror he unleashed triggered a monumental crisis of conscience. This leads us directly into his remarkable transformation through Dhamma. Ashoka couldn't unsee the carnage. Desperate to heal both his own soul and his fractured empire, he leaned heavily into the teachings of Buddhist monks he'd met earlier in his life. He totally embraced ahimsa, which is the strict principle of nonviolence, basically refraining from harming any living thing. For Ashoka, this wasn't just some nice personal philosophy. It became his absolute moral baseline. He realized military conquest only caused suffering, and he made this incredible vow to never wage a war of expansion again. But he took it even further than nonviolence. He rolled out this massive policy called Dhamma. Now, while Dhamma has religious roots, Ashoka used it as a state-sponsored moral code. It was a completely revolutionary blueprint for ethical governance. He wanted to officially replace the rule of the sword with the rule of compassion. So, what did this blueprint for society actually look like in practice? Taking a philosophical idea and applying it to millions of people is no easy feat. Ashoka completely restructured the Mauryan state. He set up this unprecedented universal healthcare system, building hospitals not just for humans, but get this, for animals too. He made religious tolerance the actual law of the land in a highly diverse society. He totally overhauled the justice system to make sure it was fair and to keep his own officials in check. He essentially built one of the world's very first welfare states. And to make sure everybody actually knew about these new laws, he bypassed the usual bureaucrats and spoke directly to the public. He had his policies, his famous rock edicts, carved into massive boulders and huge sandstone pillars all across the empire. He even had them translated into local languages like Greek and Aramaic out on the borders. He wanted every single citizen to know that their emperor was now their protector, not their predator. Which brings us to his enduring legacy. This incredible era of peace lasted for over 40 years, and his impact on the world today? It's staggering. By throwing his weight behind Buddhism and sending out missionaries, including his own kids, Mahinda and Sanghamitra, way beyond his borders, he practically single-handedly turned Buddhism from a small regional Indian sect into a massive global world religion. His influence is literally everywhere today. If you look at the official government seal of modern India, that's Ashoka's lion capital from Sarnath. His strict dedication to nonviolence pioneered early animal rights. His public works were basically the rough draft for modern universal healthcare. Policies he wrote over 2,000 years ago are still looked at as the gold standard for humane leadership. When you look at the whole picture, the contrast is just mind-blowing. On one side, you have Ashoka the Fierce, driven entirely by ruthless ambition, conquest, and bloodshed. And on the other, Ashoka the Great, defined by compassion, dhamma, and peace. It honestly feels like two completely different people, which is exactly what makes his story so relentlessly fascinating. I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. Could a modern world leader ever undergo a moral transformation that radical? In a time where political power is so often tied to ego and maintained by force, Ashoka is proof that the most powerful, lasting legacy you can leave behind is one of empathy. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.